Russians of Reddit, what is the older generation's opinion on the USSR? Born after the fall of the USSR, but both my parents grew up and lived in it. My grandmother was in the siege of Leningrad, and is still alive. There isn't much I can say, but my grandmother says it was overall a tougher time to live. However, it felt more secure than now, and much more secure than right after the fall. The 90s in Russia were a mess and a half, where there basically was no functioning government or police. My parents themselves say that the 90s were so scary that they wonder if that was better during USSR times. Edit, grammar and spelling, as you can expect, English is not my first language. Another quick edit, woke up to an insane amount of upvotes and my first ever awards, so thanks kind internet friends. English is not my first language. Uses complete sentences, and has a single typo, writes better than most native English speakers on Reddit. English is not my first language. Oh, thank God. It's going to be legible and coherent. Exactly. Ashanka show on YouTube covers life in the USSR. He was born in USSR Ukraine and now lives in the USA. He has an episode about this where he talks about older folks' opinion versus the younger generation. It's very interesting hearing his humble opinion, which doesn't seem political at all, more of, oh well, a lot of people didn't think Leader A was strong, so we weren't sad to see him leave. Oh, and the bread from this city was fantastic. When you hear someone like that talk, it really makes you see past the government and laws they lived under. Edit, channel link if allowed. Bald and Bankrupt frequently asks older people if they preferred the Soviet Union. This was in Moldova and Belarus. I don't think I've seen him ask this in Russia. Those people say that they do miss it. Especially in Moldova. I am born in USSR in the late 70s. Good way to describe it, it's like a big corporation. It gives you housing, lunches, etc., you work for it. You aren't really supposed to do your own business, because you already work for the corporation. If you do something wrong, others are supposed to give you feedback. Everyone says they are super enthused about the corporation's profits, but in reality they really don't. Also, a lot of people steal. Because who cares, it's some faceless big business, you are not hurting anyone. On the other hand, it's a stable job. You can reasonably expect to work here for the lifetime and advance in your career even if you're really stupid and can't make decisions, as long as you're not annoying the wrong people. In fact, it was a pretty sweet deal for regular people who don't really want to put in too much effort. Just do at least some job, and you're all set. Now, a lot of people are pretty butthurt about USSR, many of them rightly so. My family was like not an elite, but it was a working class family where everyone just did their job. It was a pretty shitty family by today's standards, but it wasn't a bad setting for it. Like, we had free housing, free medicine, free education, everyone was pretty happy. If only groceries were also free, that would have been just awesome, and it was expected to happen at one point. What really screwed us over is the 90s. Those were ducking horrible. May I ask, how was it like for disabled people? Or people with mental disabilities, preventing them from being able to work properly? In short, not great. Basically anyone who couldn't work was like a burden to society. I'm not speaking from data, just from how people viewed it. There were in fact social benefits for them. But a lot of people cheated and got fake disability papers to collect those, which wasn't cool. Also, it's important to mention that older people, my grandfather's generation, lived in post-World War II times and were used to actual poverty, the one where you don't have food. So they were in the mindset of, okay, let's say we feed this guy, then do we have enough food left for our children? P.S. But yes, free stuff was guaranteed just because you're a citizen, not because you work. Born and raised in Slovakia, parents grew up with the regime. It was easy as long as you were the type to shut up, mind your own business, and accept the minimum. Everyone had a roof, even though it often leaked, nobody was hungry, but good luck getting meat without bribing the butcher. Everyone had a job, some the one they chose, others the one they were forced to do. Nobody was jealous of others because everyone had equally as much, nothing. There were no hard choices about career, what school to go to, whether the housing market was right to buy now, what credit card was the best, or what benefits to choose. These were not options because there was no variety. Everything was uniform and uniformly substandard. Minimum effort for minimum results. But you were ducked if you had dreams, if you were ambitious. The regime ground you down, imprisoned you and slowly killed you if you dared to ask why or why not this way. If you were different. If you had the wrong background. If your parents happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong time. If you were one of the unlucky, It was life of imprisonment, persecution, and violence. Take an upvote from this Muscovite, we lived even shittier life. Agree completely. Free did not mean quality. Russians of Reddit everyone, I'm not Russian, but. This is justified in this thread though, because USSR was made up of not only Russia. Ukraine, Belarus, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania are some examples of nations that are not Russia but were part of the USSR, and have hundreds of people who could have relevant things to say in this thread. Also, it's asking for Russians to say what the older generation thinks of the USSR. You don't have to be a Russian to know what older Russians thought of it. There are a shitload of people whose grandparents immigrated from the USSR to another country. For the record. Most interesting AskReddit post I've encountered. Thank you. Edit, thank you for the silver. First award from a user. Never thought my minor comment would get so much attention. Born in Moscow in 1982. My both parents had PhDs and we lived in one-room apartment. We slept on couches so that it was double use. I didn't have my own space. I remember 5-hour lines and there was nothing in the stores. People were always hostile and rude to each other because it meant survival. Some people lived better. My grandparents had a 3-room apartment, because they were older. But still it was pretty dilapidated compared to the US standards. We had an old car called Moskvich. Some people lived better, but they either bribed someone, I was angry at my parents that they refused to, or were in the government, or just knew someone. There was a lot of corruption and red tape and you couldn't own your own property, you couldn't buy a house. You had to find someone who was willing to trade homes with you. My grandparents were from Odessa, Ukraine, and when they wanted to move to Moscow to be close to us, they found someone who would want their great apartment in Odessa in exchange for their awful panel apt in Moscow. I forgot to add that my parents wouldn't get paid for months and lived on IS from work. My mom worked as a biologist in an institute that developed Cold War bioweapons and dealt with anthrax, Ebola, etc. At some point people were getting paid in coupons instead of money: sugar, bread, tobacco, vodka, flour, butter. My mom worked as a biologist in an institute that developed Cold War bioweapons and dealt with anthrax, Ebola, etc. That's horrifying. I didn't learn about the bioweapons part till much later. Her workplace was mentioned in a book on Cold War. My mom would take me to work and I'd count bacteria in a petri dish. Counting bacteria in a petri dish sounds definitely what a mom w a PhD would make her kid do, haha. Here sweetie, count these little ebellini for mommy, would you? So I was technically born in USSR, but way too late. So on my mother's side of the family people went, great-grandparents, peasants. Grandparents, qualified laborers. Mother, higher education, worked in road. Father's side, grandparents, peasant, father, higher education in an emerging field. I remembers the 90x's crawling in the ruins or old factories or visiting complex magnificent factories being basically pulled apart. I remember how parent were not paid for months and how the new company that charged for heat electricity sent bills higher than a single person's salary. My parents lost 10,000 plus Soviet rubles. Remember how my parents argued about Brezhnev versus Khrushchev. They came from different parts of USSR which prospered under different gensecks. Remember how my mother described how shit were 1950x on the Volga and situation was bordering famine. She told me that one of my relatives really hated Stalin and would openly curse him and he was never punished for that. My mother loved to traveled all across USSR and some parts of Eastern Europe. Oh, and boy were logistics in USSR bad. Slightly related, but in Hungary, which was part of the Eastern Bloc, many old people think communism and socialism was much better than the current system and feel nostalgic about it. Part of this can be that the 60s and the 70s were more like a soft dictatorship than hardcore communism. The other reason is that they were young at that time, so that's where the nostalgia comes from. They often say life was easier and simpler for them as everyone had a stable job that secured a basic lifestyle. They also say people were much kinder to each other back then, but who knows? Hungary was much better off than USSR and many people traveled there to get clothes and other necessities. My grandma would go there for work and bring back stuff I've never even heard of. Svetlana Alexievich, 2015 Nobel Prize in Literature, also author of the book that inspired the famous Chernobyl miniseries, has a book in which she gathers the opinions of dozens of Russians or ex-Soviet citizens about the collapse of the USSR. I think the English title is Secondhand Time, The Last of the Soviets. It's a very interesting and objective reading. It's composed of the declarations she gets, Simply transcribed and meshed together. 100% recommended if you want to dig more into the 90s in ex-Soviet territories. Russian here. From what I've heard from my old folks, in USSR it was hard to live, but easy to survive. Government covered all of your basics, but you didn't have a lot of opportunities to do stuff you like. Everyone missed free housing and free healthcare. My grandma thinks doctors were better back then, because they actually cared, but now they only work for, disgustingly low, salary. Oh, and the moral superiority is a major factor. Communism is like for the strong-willed, intelligent people, but capitalism is for stupid little goddamn savages, in short. 90s got us ducked up hard, really hard. You had to be there to understand. It really would answer a lot of questions about modern Russia. Personally, I think 90s broke us.